This is Forum Daily for Monday, March 14th. I'm Nathaniel Duick, filling in for Nima Rajan. We start tonight's newscast with Commonwealth Day commemorations. Queen Elizabeth did not attend Monday's service at Westminster Abbey and was instead represented by the Prince of Wales. Per its website, the Commonwealth is a voluntary association of 54 independent and equal countries around the world that work together for prosperity, democracy, and peace. The roots of the Commonwealth go back to the British Empire, but today, any country can join the organization. Taken together, 2.5 million people in both advanced and developing economies are part of the Commonwealth. Well, moving to Canada's labour market now, where the head of Canada's largest private sector union is retiring amid ongoing health issues. Unifor says its national president, Jerry Dias, is stepping down after over 8 years in the role. It has also launched an investigation into allegations that Mr. Dias engaged in an alleged breach of the union's constitution. Unifor represents 315,000 workers across multiple sectors. Well, this while the Finance Department says single parents, lower-income households, and recent immigrants are most likely to see 50% or more of their extra earnings offset by higher taxes, a clawback in benefits, or both. Workers who live in Quebec and those in the 35 to 44 age bracket were also more likely to lose out from extra earnings gained through working more hours or getting a higher paying job. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says the study supports calls from anti-poverty advocates and businesses for a broad review of the tax system to bring it up to date. Moving to Atlantic Canada now, where today is the day New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador are dropping most of their COVID-19 restrictions. Some experts fear it could cause a rise in case numbers, particularly among children and healthcare workers. On the other side of the country, the executive director of the Alliance of Beverage Licensees of BC says since his province dropped its mask mandate for indoor public spaces last Friday, people are partying like it's 2019. Well, meanwhile, it doesn't look like Alberta's premier has much to celebrate. Political scientists say Jason Kenney will be the clear loser in tomorrow's by-election in the riding of Fort McMurray-Lac La Biche, as all three candidates are opposed to his leadership. Mount Royal University political analyst Laurie Williams expects longtime politician Brian Jean, whose entire campaign has been about removing Mr. Kenney as leader, will win the seat for the United Conservative Party. Her colleague, Dwayne Bratt, says an NDP win might allow Mr. Kenney to rally his party around the idea that infighting could help New Democrats win the next election. To another election now, where the federal Conservative leadership race has grown to include 5 candidates, with the entry of a former leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. Brampton, Ontario Mayor Patrick Brown launched his campaign yesterday. He addressed the main concern raised about his past support for carbon pricing, which many party members reject as an ineffective tax. Mr. Brown said if elected leader, Conservatives would decide on the party's environmental policy collectively. Meanwhile, the federal government is looking at making changes to the Cannabis Act. These would let people buy more cannabis drinks at a time without exceeding public possession limits. The proposed changes would see the quantity of cannabis drinks adults could possess increase from 2.1 liters to 17.1 liters. Current rules allow people to buy far more vapes, oil sprays, and edibles than drinks. Well, to another kind of possession change now, Loblaw is paying $845 million in cash to buy Lifemark Health Group. Lifemark provides a variety of rehabilitation services. It has more than 300 clinics across Canada. Loblaw, which also owns Shoppers Drug Mart, says the deal will help grow its business as a healthcare service provider. Well, Bobsleigh Canada is being called on to make some big changes. A group of 82 Canadian bobsled and skeleton athletes delivered a letter to Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton this morning, repeating their call for the immediate resignations of CEO Sarah Story and High Performance Director Chris Lebihan. That's 22 more names than registered the initial complaint last week over issues regarding culture, safety, transparency, and governance. The organization plans to hire an independent mediator to address the concerns. And it's a happy St. Patrick's Day, if you live in Newfoundland and Labrador, that is. Today is a paid holiday for provincial government workers. Newfoundland and Labrador is the only province to mark the holiday, which falls on the Monday closest to March 17th. And we'll be back after the break with a look at Women's History Month, so stay tuned to Forum Daily. We'll be right back after the break. March is Women's History Month, which highlights women's contributions to events in history and in contemporary society. While it is important to remember women who have made impacts in the fight for equal opportunities, experts say more progress is still needed. In comments for International Women's Day, Seema Bahaus, Executive Director of UN Women, says that progress to a more gender-equal world is being undermined by interlocking and compounded crises. This year especially highlights the impact of the pandemic on women's equality. With us to discuss the current state of women's equality is Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Welcome to Forum Daily.
Nice to be with you.
Great to have you. Now, what is the importance of remembering women who've made significant impacts in the fight for equal opportunities today?
You know, the world committed to achieving sustainable development goals by 2030. And one of the most important sustainable development goals is SDG 5, which is focused on gender equality. But when you look at the fact that we're only 8 years away from 2030, and you look at the amount of progress that's been made on SDG 5, you realize that we have a very long way to go. And if anything, all of the challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic. That's why Women's History Month, it takes on even more importance today than ever before, because it's important to remember that we are actually riding on the work of many, many brave women's rights activists who have gone before us and whose work was instrumental in laying out a framework for gender equality that we must all abide by and live by if we want to build a sustainable world coming out of the pandemic. That's why Women's History Month is so important, because it is important to sort of sit back, reflect, and remember contributions of women who've gone before us, but also keep attention highlighted on the work we still have to do. You know, people have short memories, crises come and go. And so you have to find a way through all the noise to keep focused on really important issues like gender equality.
Speaking of staying focused on the task at hand, how would you describe the current state of women's equality both here in Canada and around the world?
Look, we've made a lot of progress in the last 25 years. So if you look at where we were at the time that the Beijing conference took place, which was 26 years ago, where Hillary Clinton famously said women's rights are human rights, a lot has changed in the world since then. We've seen big advances in access to education for girls. We've seen big advances in maternal mortality rates. We've seen big advances in women's representation. But actually, when you look in absolute terms, there is still a huge amount of work to be done because the baseline that we were starting from 26 years ago was pretty low. So just to give you an idea of how things still are not there yet, if you look at how many parliamentarians worldwide are women, it's only 25% of all parliamentarians who are women. It's not 50-50 yet. If you look at heads of state or heads of government, less than 10% of heads of state or government are women. And if you look at gender equal cabinets, you know, we have 193 member states in the United Nations and less than 20 of them have gender equal cabinets. So that's just one area of work. And then big problems that women have faced for a long time, like violence against women, have actually not gone down. They've actually gone up during the pandemic. And many areas where we were improving, for example, women being in the labor force, women holding jobs, all of those things have gotten much worse during the pandemic. So overall, I would say the picture is not a good one because many of the advances that we have made were undone in the last 2 years.
Yeah, the pandemic has really played a tremendous role in many, many different facets of society. Focusing on the future here, about 30 seconds left now. What more needs to be done in the global fight for equality?
Well, first, governments have to acknowledge this is a problem, and they have to have special policies to focus on it. When you look at the stimulus packages that were put together after the pandemic, many of them did not reach women. The money did not reach women. So governments have to recognize it's an issue, deal with it. The private sector has a role to play. This is too big a problem to be solved just by government. There's got to be a public and a private partnership approach to it. Leadership matters, and we need women at the decision-making table in order to see real change.
women at the table to see real change. Well, thank you so much for that, Anita Bhatia, Deputy Director of UN Women. All right, we'll be back after the break with a look at electricity and the role it might play in the ongoing energy crisis. We have an interview with Parker Gallant, energy researcher and regular contributor at the Financial Post. Stay with us right here on Forum Daily. We'll be right back. Powerful winds swept across Atlantic Canada over the weekend, knocking out power to thousands of hydro customers in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Almost all of them have since had the lights and heat turned back on, while New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island were spared any major outages. These outages come amid about what is being referred to as a global energy crisis, amid an oil and gas supply that is not meeting global demand. And as the world shifts to electricity and renewables, the issue of outages will become increasingly significant. Well, with us to discuss energy policy is Parker Gallant, a retired banker and energy researcher. He is also a regular contributor to the Financial Post on matters related to the energy sector, and he joins us now. Welcome, Mr. Gallant.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, pleasure to have you on. Firstly, let's begin with this. What are the factors that seem to be driving the current energy crisis?
Well, there are a number of them, actually. Of course, you have the Russian-Ukraine war, which has disrupted oil and gas getting into Europe and other places. That's one of the items, and of course, I always think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we had COP26 back in November of last year in Scotland. And they, went all full bore for net zero, at least the countries that are developed. Not so much the undeveloped countries like China or India. They're saying that we can't make it there. So the net zero sort of targets, I think, have created a real, problem.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about this net zero. We know the government of Canada has committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. What exactly does this process entail or look like?
Well, it basically is, we stop using all fossil fuels. So that means that, every automobile, every truck, every bus, every locomotive that operates in the country should be, doing so with the use of electricity by that time. But of course, where is that electricity going to come from, is the big question. And, we just don't have enough electricity to, fossil-free electricity to be able to do that.
Well, that was my next question. Do we have the infrastructure to meet this increased demand? And if not, how do we go about acquiring it or building it?
Well, I personally don't think we have the power. The only province that sort of is fully, if you will, fossil fuel free, except for the automobiles and all the other things that consume oil and gas, is Quebec. And Quebec has enough electricity available to supply most of what they need, but they have long-term contracts to supply a lot of the US states. That means that they won't be able to go, all full bore net zero either. So, but beyond that, basically no other province has got the capability of going to net zero without cutting back an awful lot on the use of their electricity. That's the only way it could be accomplished. Then that's not possible. I mean, we had an event here in Ontario where 30 municipalities wrote into the Minister of Energy and said, we want to cut down and shut down all the gas plants. The IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator, came out and said in their report, said it's going to cost $27 billion. That's just Ontario. So, the price of that's only the price of getting rid of the gas plants in the province. It doesn't mean full electrification of all our automobiles and railways and everything else.
And I think you mentioned it there as well. Electric vehicles are seen as one of the key drivers of a shift towards a more green or renewable economy or energy sector. What needs to be done for the rubber to really hit the road for widespread adoption of EVs?
Well, I saw a report that I believe it was a university that came out with it, and it said that we need another 10,000 megawatts of capacity in order to be able to, charge up those electric vehicles. And we don't have that available at all in terms of fossil-free fuels. We've got two fairly significant hydro plants being built at the present time, one in Newfoundland and one in British Columbia that will bring about, 1,500 megawatts to us. So we're going to be short an awful lot of electricity.
That's an awfully lot of short, we'll be short a bit of electricity there anyway.
Yes,
Well,
right.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program today, Mr. Gallant.
Well, thank you for having me.
We'll be right back right here on Forum Daily. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia were held today and ended without a resolution. But Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak says they will resume on Tuesday. He tweeted, "This is a technical pause that will allow for additional work in the working subgroups and clarification of individual definitions." Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to address Parliament Tuesday morning and will deliver an address via video to the U.S. Congress on Wednesday. The war has now forced more than 2.8 million people to flee Ukraine. Poland has taken in more than 1.7 million refugees in the last 19 days alone. As peace talks continue, NATO says its Operation Cold Response exercise that started today in Norway is not linked to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. About 30,000 troops from more than 25 countries are taking part in the drill, which includes 200 aircraft and 50 vessels. Canadian Armed Forces members from 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, including 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, are taking part. The exercise is being held just a few hundred kilometers from the Russian border. Russia declined to be an observer, and Norway's armed forces said it provided information to the Russians to prevent any misunderstandings. As NATO exercises begin, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov is denying reports that Russia asked China for military assistance in its offensive in Ukraine. He says the operation is going as planned and that the Russian military is ensuring, quote, the maximum security of the civilian population. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in Rome meeting a top Chinese official. He says Washington has told Beijing it will not let any country compensate Russia for its losses from economic sanctions. Military tensions are also increasing in Southeast Asia. The Philippine government has summoned the Chinese ambassador to protest what it said was the illegal incursion of a Chinese Navy ship into the country's waters for 3 days, from January 29th to February 1st. Philippines' Foreign Undersecretary on Monday demanded China order its ships to respect the country's territory and follow international law. Despite warnings from the Philippine Navy vessel, the Chinese PLA ship said it was exercising rightful passage. Military tensions continue between Iraq and Iran. Iraq's prime minister has visited the city of Erbil to meet with Kurdish officials and inspect the site of an Iranian missile attack a day earlier. The missile barrage hit near the American consulate in the Kurdish region and drew condemnation from Iraqi and U.S. officials. Iran claimed responsibility for Sunday's missile barrage, calling it a retaliation for an Israeli strike in Syria that killed 2 members of its Revolutionary Guard earlier last week. Well, shifting to the ongoing fight against the pandemic now. China is dealing with its biggest COVID-19 outbreak since the pandemic started. Beijing has banned most people from leaving a hard-hit northeastern province and mobilized 7,000 military reservists to battle the fast-spreading stealth Omicron variant. Earlier research suggests the BA.2 strain of the Omicron variant spreads faster than the original. Well, the coronavirus may be surging in China, but France is lifting most of its COVID-19 restrictions. People are no longer required to wear face masks in almost all places, and those who are not vaccinated can go back into restaurants, sports arenas, and other leisure venues. The move follows weeks of a steady decline in infections. Dire news now about the Arab world's poorest country. More than a dozen UN agencies and international aid groups say that 161,000 people in war-torn Yemen are likely to experience famine over the second half of 2022. That's a 5-fold increase from the current figure. And this is according to a report known as the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC. The UN is hosting an annual aid conference for Yemen on Wednesday. And to a deadly disaster now in Mozambique. Officials say Cyclone Gombe has flooded large areas of northern and central Mozambique, killing at least 15 people. The Prime Minister's office announced that the number of injured is now at least 50. More than 100,000 people were forced from their homes by the strong cyclone. And we end the newscast now on a positive note. A Victoria-based nonprofit is among many organizations across Canada shifting focus to help Ukrainians during the Russian invasion. Dr. Bridget Sterling, president of iCross, says the organization has set up a supply chain from Warsaw in Poland to Lviv in western Ukraine. Dr. Sterling says iCross is also collecting donations to help pay for medication that it plans to send to a children's hospital in Ukraine. Well, I'm Nathaniel Duick, filling in for Nima Rajan. And that'll do it for your look at national and international news on Forum Daily. Be sure to follow us online and watch us for updates. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.